to welcome everyone back to our conference on abuse and trauma, and in the role of faith in healing. And today we're so lucky to have Matt Daniels, a leader in human rights in the digital age, here to talk to us. Today, the conversation is a great deal about abuse and trauma in an adult world, because it's in that world that child protection and vulnerable people are left open to dangers. And next week, we will be talking to Father Hans Zollner from the Vatican, who moves into this world that Matt and I will be talking about today and tries to promote a Catholic program to Catholics who are living in these settings too. So Matt, I can't say thank you enough for being here. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit by talking about your many accolades and why you are an expert that people can really be comfortable with. You're the founder of Good of All. I thought we would start there. Can you talk a little bit about Good of All and what this group does, which is quite amazing?
Yeah, our mission is to try to promote universal rights through digital media to a digital generation as a way to inoculate hearts and minds against ideologies of violent extremism, of genocide, of racism, and of discrimination. We try to use digital media in creative ways that go beyond most of the traditional uses that educators, that the educational establishment doesn't really use digital media all that well. And we've been pioneering ways to use it more creatively and effectively with young people.
Yeah, it's quite impressive, some of the things you're doing. The Good of All has a really heavy hitter board of directors and sponsors. I mean, you even have the chief crown prosecutor from the UK, who's renowned for all of the work he's done promoting human rights too.
Yeah, it's been wonderful for me to be able to build a coalition that reflects the appeal of our mission to a broad array of communities around the world. Universal rights is really the thread that holds together, I think, every civilized society. And you find support for universal rights in every culture that's allowed to experience any sort of freedom. It's a common grace or a natural law truth that people are given these rights as a birthright, and they cannot even experience their full humanity without them.
It's pretty wonderful. I know that, and you work around the world. Not only are you out of the Institute of World Politics in DC, as they're a chair of, I think it's human rights, law and human rights, but also you work with Brunel Law School out of London and as a visiting professor. And also, can you talk a little bit about their program of law and digital culture?
Yeah, what we've done at a number of academic centers that I've established is training young students first in the principles of universal rights, and then training them to be content creators where they create, they use digital media to create educational content. I'm going to back up. I just got a call. Can I start again?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So we've created a network of academic centers around the world where young people are trained in universal rights and then encouraged to harness the power of digital media to be peer ambassadors, if you will, digital ambassadors to their peers with respect to fundamental human rights principles. So I've done this at a law school in London, in West London, actually, in a community that's predominantly Muslim. Mm-hmm. I've done this in South Korea, and have just launched a new program at the University of Costa Rica, creating Spanish language content. And then, of course, we have students here in the US doing the same.
It's pretty wonderful. I think out of South Korea that you did a series of videos documenting the experiences of survivors of the labor camps in North Korea. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, that was a powerful journey for me to actually interview people who had survived the North Korean concentration camp system and escaped. It's really on a par with interviewing survivors of, Auschwitz. It's a life-changing experience when you hear their stories.
Yeah, Yeah, and to be able to document it digitally, then you can share it, which we'll get into shortly. But it gives people a sense of the breadth of your reach and what you and your collaborators are trying to do. It's pretty powerful. And it reminds me of when we first met, you were working on your book, Human Liberty 2.0, which people will find on the webpage attached to this broadcast. And really, you were documenting some of the top digital Samaritans who were out there using digital technology to advance human rights in all sorts of settings.
Yeah, it's actually a wonderful antidote to the evening news if you start reading some of the stories of these digital Samaritans who have harnessed the power of digital media to be ambassadors and change agents for universal rights around the world. You really get inspired and encouraged about the possibilities for the human race to use digital technology for good. We have stories of men and women from every continent in the world, some of them quite young, who have had an astonishing impact for good through these tools.
It's pretty, I remember I've read the book and I recommend it strongly just because it really does give you a sense that we aren't as powerless as we think when we hear these giant problems that are out there.
Amen to that.
Well, I want to talk to you about the Human Rights Network eventually, but we're talking about human rights. We're talking about a worldwide approach. Your work, anything that people read about your work, they're going to see the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the core of everything you do. I think it's a good moment and this is very important for people who are attending or are following our broadcast series. What is this declaration? How come it does reach the entire world as a single document?
Yeah, well, to understand the Declaration, you need to understand its history. It was created in the aftermath of the Holocaust to be a Bill of Rights for humanity, if you will, a standard to which all nations would be held accountable in the future, a transnational cross-cultural summary of the most fundamental human rights principles that are essential for people to experience their human dignity. You may recall that during the period of World War II, many nations used legal excuses for not wanting to intervene in what was happening in Germany. And so many countries simply took the position that what the Germans did pursuant to German law was their business. And, Hitler, after all, was democratically elected. And why should we interfere in the will of the German people? After the war, of course, when the full extent of the horrors of the Holocaust were uncovered, there was a moment of moral reckoning, and the world affirmed, with a few notable exceptions, pretty much every nation on Earth in existence in 48 has affirmed the text of the Declaration, and it has become the gold standard for universal rights, translated into more languages than the Bible or the Quran.
Which is a really powerful statement in terms of talk about something the world could agree on. What are the rights? I mean, what are the universal rights that they would say, at least for our viewers, the top ones, if you can do it, if you can.
Well, there's 30 articles and they deal with all of the most basic fundamental rights. The basic right to life, to liberty, to protection from government oppression, judicial due process, right to an education, right to access to healthcare, the things that without which you really can't be human. And of course, there are many cultures that take issue with some of the rights in the Declaration. And there's been an intellectual trend in the West, unfortunately, in the last couple of decades to assert that all moral and legal norms are relative, they're culturally bound, and therefore, one cannot talk in terms of transcendent legal norms or ethical norms. But I think history, again and again, going back to the Holocaust as a prime example, has shown us the danger of that approach. Either these rights are universal or they're meaningless. They are universal or they're nothing. And I happen to believe they are universal. I happen to believe that every society that has ever achieved any level of civilization honors these rights, and we have to hold every country, including our own, accountable to the standards of the Declaration.
It's really quite inspiring. I always am inspired when I speak with you, but it also, there is a choice at the heart of this. Do you believe there's a universal right in some areas or not? And you are helping people find what do I want to say? As you use digital technology, sometimes what I observe is you're helping people recognize that these are aspirations that every human being seems to have written in their heart. And it's not like people in Brunei have a different wish from their life than I do when I walk around.
Yeah, that's right. They resurface time and again throughout history because they are written on the human heart. And we ought to be bold about proclaiming their universality. Part of the struggle against evil and oppression is being bold about calling it out and identifying it and giving it a name. And you know, as Shirin Ebadi, the Iranian Nobel Peace Prize laureate, has said, cultural relativism is little more than an excuse for oppression in many societies. The Chinese regime, Iranian regime, the Saudi regime, they all justify horrific human rights abuses in the name of cultural relativism. And you have to choose which side you're on. You're either going to be on the side of the Third Reich, of the Chinese Communist Party, of the Saudi regime, of the Iranian regime, or you're going to be on the side of civilization and those who are willing to assert the universality of fundamental rights.
And it's very powerful because there's not a middle ground on this one.
No.
And you know, to tolerate is the oppression increases. It's not as if then there's a natural limit on how much power somebody will grab. They're just the strong men and women of history who will abuse that access. Yeah, it also takes what your work is about digital technology becoming a disruptor for entrenched human right violations. A good example is the work with North Korea. Who would have known, except that you can document, and then boy, you can spread that around the web fast.
Yeah, that's right.
There's not censorship. Yeah,
we have digital media is an incredibly powerful tool. It can be used for good or evil, and it's up to us to use it for good.
And I've watched you use it for good and help others use it for good, and make really of the world the potential for every person to be able to witness. And the minute you witness evil, you're already taking it out of the darkness into the light, and you're already making that step that then really calls us to action, which can be daunting too. Again, this brings us to all of the different educational initiatives you have, which says, no, it's not daunting. You can choose something and focus on it. Which brings me kind of full circle, which is to say, when we come back and we take a look at, for example, some of the work you've done, let's look at the Universal Rights Academy that you've done with the Human Rights Network. Talk to me a little bit about the coursework and that network in particular that I mean, you've had millions of people looking at these videos, getting ideas. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, we pioneered a strategy which we like to call edutainment. I said earlier that many educators use digital media in a backwards way. If you want to reach an audience online, you must entertain first and educate second, or you will not reach anyone. You might be able to reach a captive audience in a classroom if you get that equation backwards. But working with the founder of Disney Interactive, who's been a mentor and advisor to me, that's Disney's online division, we started pioneering an approach where we would train young people to create movie and gaming reviews themed around human rights. And so our YouTube channel, which is universalrights.com, has achieved over 35 million views for those videos organically. And we're now launching an educational platform, universalrights.org, where we do a deeper dive into issues using the format of Khan Academy. It's kind of a human rights version of Khan Academy, but we still keep the emphasis on edutainment. So we try to use as much as possible Hollywood content, gaming content, and there's a surprising amount that you can do with that content when you repurpose it properly. The reason we work with young people as content creators is that digital natives, the generation digital natives are the generation that have never known life without the internet, and they tend to learn laterally. They don't absorb information well from adults or from educational institutions or from government bureaucracies. They absorb it best from their peers. And so if you want to get your educational message out, it's wise to train digital natives as content creators and let them be, in a sense, a kind of digital choir that sings the message of your educational message. You want them to be a digital choir for your educational message. They each have a different voice that they bring to the enterprise of educating their peers. That's one of the beautiful things about it. And yet they all sing in harmony because they're singing off of the common song sheet of universal rights. So that's the formula that we've used to capture an audience of over 30 million on YouTube. And that's in English. We have portals in Arabic that are at over 10 million. And the Universal Rights Academy, which is universalrights.org, is the next phase of that ongoing online education process.
And when I think of people in the States, it's a little easier to picture 30 million, clicking in and watching it, but not necessarily at risk to life. But some of the people who are clicking in the Arab nations, it's very brave that they even checked in on it, and it's really helping hearten them in their efforts.
One of the things that we discovered on our Arabic network, where we do movie reviews in Arabic, is that a large number of the comments posted by men are actually women who disguise themselves as men so that they can safely comment online.
Yeah.
Their profiles, so they'll have a male profile, but it's actually a woman.
Yeah. You can kind of see it to understand what they're going through. And now talk a little bit about some of the other, you have a K through 12 program and you have quite a few educational programs, again, that are helping people not be overwhelmed by the evils we're witnessing more because of media. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We decided that we would begin to create curricula for K-12 education, both public and private schools. And so in the US context, I felt that it would be best to do that through the vehicle of Dr. King's teachings, which were very much rooted in transcendent universal principles. Part of the man's greatness lies in the fact that he had a message for all humanity. He didn't just have a message for a Southern audience about race relations in the context of the 1960s. He had a transcendent universal message. It's as relevant today as it was in his day. And so we've tried to, in a sense, put a digital spin on Dr. King. We have a high school course and a 6th grade course that teaches Dr. King's principles to young people. Then we encourage them to dream on paper about how they can use the tools of digital media, which are unavailable in Dr. King's era, to be ambassadors for those principles in our world today. And that's been going out into over half a dozen states in public and private schools. It should be in a dozen states by the fall or more, and it's being well received.
And it's really wonderful because, again, in something that people do face when we're dealing with this, you're talking to a younger audience about sometimes difficult things, but in a message that's empowering and not frightening, and it can be done. People don't have to close down around this.
I'll share 2 stories with you, one from London and one from the US. So in my class in London, I had a Muslim student, immigrant from Pakistan, obviously from a conservative Muslim family, because she was not just wearing a hijab. I mean, most of my students were female, wear a hijab, but she was wearing a niqab, which is the face veil. And she wouldn't speak for weeks in our class, which is makes me feel uncomfortable because I teach Socratically and I encourage participation. And then one day, as I was lecturing on the struggles of women in India, using a video created by one of my American students who's from an Indian background about the plight of women in the untouchable class in rural India, who really have almost no rights. As a practical matter, they don't have legal rights when it comes to especially abuses committed against them by members of the upper class. After weeks of silence, as I'm lecturing on this topic and sharing this video, the young girl in the back of my class in London bangs her hand on the table and says, "That's what's happening to my friends. That's happening in my country. I can't talk about it. My family gets angry when I talk about it." And of course, my whole class goes silent. And I said, "Well, Fatima, we need to hear those stories. Our audience online needs to hear those stories because they don't know that." And so she went on to create videos on so-called honors killings in Pakistan, forced marriage, rape in Pakistan, and a number of other terrible abuses like acid attacks that women suffer that have garnered millions of views on our portal. We protect the names of our content creators so that no one can retaliate against them, so their face does not appear on camera. So she was given a digital mic to speak to the whole world safely. And she told me at the end of the class, she said, "Professor, this course was the first time in my life that I've ever been able to say what I think." And I realized, there's millions of Fatimas. Our fastest growing audience demographic online is young Muslim women who love our message of fundamental rights and human dignity and often do not find it expressed or offered to them in their home cultures. Another vignette for you recently from a school in South Carolina where my MLK course is being taught. The African-American female headmistress of the school had a young Black girl come into her office crying one day because she was so upset about the violence in the nation's capital and feeling like the country's falling apart. We're heading towards civil war, and was very distressed. And the head of the school told her, "Look, this is your call to be the solution. You need to educate yourself and equip yourself to be the answer to this problem, to educate your peers so that this doesn't engulf this country and tear down everything that we've been given, our institutions, our democratic culture, and so on." And, basically shared material from the course with the girl and got the girl into the course. And she said it made all the difference in this girl's attitude because suddenly she felt empowered that she could actually make a difference in the future of the country. And that's exactly how we're going to win this battle in every country around the world, is by finding these young people whose hearts yearn for these transcendent truths and then giving them the tools to be change agents and educators of their peers.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful message, and it's also shows that around the world there is the same heart, the same longing, and that we can respond. And that's really the message I knew that you would share with us. And that's why I'm really grateful that you came and spent time. I know I was laughing. In a way, I expected to see a flash go by your screen because you're always moving at such high rate of motion. I'm never sure if I could even catch you. But I really appreciate your time. And I think you've really helped viewers think of this in a new way and also place the plight of child protection in the greater world where both a lot of darkness is there. We see it more because of media, but we also are less powerless because of media. So I thank you very much, and I bless you for your time, and I can't thank you enough, Matt.
Oh, you're welcome, Teresa. God bless you.
Bye-bye.